Ready to go.
Okay. Good morning, everybody, and welcome back. Today we're going to go through rebuilding a Craftsman weed eater and then doing all the fine adjustments once it's done. A lot of times on one of these, people will adjust them and adjust them and adjust them as the diaphragms get a little bit stiffer. And once you've rebuilt it, it doesn't mean it's going to run. You're going to have to go through it and start all over again with the adjustments. And that's not real obvious. Okay, so all you new people out there, go ahead and subscribe. It's free and it's what we work for. So let's get started. So we picked this big boy up as part of a deal for a steel weed eater. And I think this one's going to be pretty savable. It's a good looking weed eater and it's a straight shaft and people love straight shafts. The first thing we're going to do is pull the carburetor off real quick. And after that, after we've got this out of the way, see now looking at this, you can tell this is an aftermarket gasket, which means this has definitely been opened up more than once. So before we take the fuel lines off, we're going to crack the gas cap, because if there's any gas in it at all, it's going to try to kick back to the lines. And it looks like we're going to have to replace some fuel lines too while we're at it. These don't, well, the return line looks okay, but the outgoing line looks a little bit rough. There we go. And there it is. We've got our carburetor. This gasket usually sits right here. That back gasket rarely goes bad, so we don't worry about that too much. So let's get her apart and see what we've got. I think this is, let's see what carburetor we've got here. And you're going to need this when you order gaskets for it. This one's I think a 42. Okay, once we get her apart, we'll clean her up real good and find out exactly which gaskets we need to order. When you do order gaskets, make it a point to stay organized and do this first, because this is what you want to match. There's that gasket right there. You can see the little curve in it, or it looks like a little cereal bowl from the top. And this little flap is bent out just a bit, which means it's really not going to work the way it could. So just seeing that, I've got complete faith in this carburetor. It's definitely savable. But if the carburetor was, if the machine was being run with this gasket in it, then you know that the adjustments probably were adjusted over and over and over again in order to keep it running. There we go. This is your little metering diaphragm. Usually they don't stick quite that much, but this one's stuck. And I don't know if you can hear that. It's making a little bit of a clicking noise, which means it's overly stiff. So now we'll get the old gasket out of the way. Very gently, of course. And very carefully not to cut ourselves. I always try to cut away from my fingers as much as I can. Anybody who's hung around here much knows that I could sponsor a Band-Aid company. Okay, that's close enough for now, and it is smooth. So now I'm going to take this and clean it up really good and get her ready for the next step. And I'm going to do that by putting it in an ultrasonic. But you could soak this in carburetor cleaner overnight, and it would accomplish the same thing. Now that we've got the carburetor all nice and clean, let's go ahead and put new gaskets on it and get her back together. So we'll start out on the proverbial bottom. And we'll put the metering diaphragm on first. And make a note of what order the gaskets go on. And if you don't have one of them, then you need to stop, because you need both of them for it to work correctly. The bottom gasket acts both as a gasket and as a spacer. Let's get that first screw started, and that'll hold everything in place while we do the rest of them. Where are you at, buddy? There you go. Now we just put that on loosely. Now we'll finger start the rest of them. There you go. Now let's tighten her down. Now I'm not going too terribly tight on the first pass. And we'll snug them up after we're done. Okay, that takes care of the metering diaphragm. So let's get all the gaskets back in place on the top. Okay, now that the metering diaphragm's done, we're going to go ahead and set the gaskets on the top plate. Get them lined up. And make sure that you cover all the holes. Make sure that the new gaskets you put on match the ones you remove. Scoot that out of the way. There we go. Now we'll place our purge bulb back, like so. And every one of these is a little bit different, and you'll find, even on this diaphragm, you'll find a whole lot of versions that are just slightly different. So you have to make sure yours matches 100%, or you'll more than likely block a port that you don't want to block. Okay, now she should be all ready to go. She's looking pretty good. Get that little piece of extra gasket out of the way. Now we're going to go ahead and replace the fuel lines on this because, well, they look terrible. So to do that, the first thing we're going to do is remove the old ones. Easy peasy. And let's drop it inside. Okay, it's got one little piece that's still sticking. There we go. So let's get that out of there before we continue. Now we're going to thread this through, and you've got two holes to work with, and it doesn't matter which one you do first or which one goes where. We'll put a nice taper on this. That's not a very nice taper. That's a nicer taper. This is 100 times easier to do this part while the carburetor's off. And usually if you buy a rebuild kit, you can buy fuel line along with the kit. There we go. Now we're moving. I'll go ahead and pull that off. We're going to lay this in the tank on a low spot, and that'll be our target for when we stop pulling wire through. So now I'm pulling it through while I'm watching the bulb inside to make sure it ends up right where I want it. And that's just about where I want it. So now we're going to hold the carburetor up here and say to ourselves, okay, we want the line to go to about there. And I do it this way just so I don't waste a bunch of line. I could cut it and assume the size, but then you're guaranteed you're going to be throwing line away. So now we'll do our return. Easy peasy. Oh, you come back here. And your return only has to make its way inside the tank and be of a length where it won't get accidentally pulled back through if somebody bumps it with their finger. You can see the taper from our previous pull is still on the other end of this. That will have no effect on it whatsoever. So we'll take it to approximately the same place, and now we'll leave that there and go ahead and install our carburetor. Our little gasket's still here, so that's good to go. Let's get our air box ready. Get one bolt started. Which way do we want to go? We want to go this way. Now we're quickly coming up to the fun part. We're going to have to retune this carburetor completely since it's gotten new gaskets and whatnot in it. And that should take care of that. Let's attach our fuel lines, which you made a little bit too long. I'm going to come over on this side with you. And if you put these on and the gas is flowing the wrong direction, don't lose any sleep over it. You can just pull them off the carburetor and put them back on correctly later. There we go, and that should do it. And now we'll test our trigger. Everything seems to work correctly. We haven't touched any of the settings on this at all. And this is a air filter based choke system, so we don't have to worry about that. So let's put some fuel in it and tune her up. Okay, before we tune it, first thing we're going to do is test the primer bulb to make sure fuel comes in and out through the lines we expect it to. And it does. And it's priming nicely. Don't worry about it if your fuel is not filling the primer bulb up entirely, because this is actually a purge bulb. And it doesn't have to fill up the purge bulb. What it has to do is make sure the fuel is filling up the carburetor. Now we're going to select our correct tool, which in this case is a Pac-Man. You can tell it's a Pac-Man because these bolts have a little slot in them. So the two tools we're going to use is the Phillips and the Pac-Man. We're going to go ahead and turn the idle up just a little bit to start off. We'll put the Phillips off to the side. Can you see? You can see. Okay, good then. And now we're going to place our Pac-Man on our low and just leave it there. With a little luck, it'll stay there. Okay, that's actually surprisingly good, and we haven't made any adjustments. What we're going to do is we're going to go up and down and see if this is the perfect spot. And you can see that was pretty closer to correct. Now it's idling a little bit low, and it sounds a little bit rough, so we're going to go ahead and lean it down just a touch. And it really is by ear. And that's it. Now this one came up pretty close right off the bat. But remember, when you turn the L screw, you're affecting the idle, but it will have a minor effect on the revving. When you're turning the high screw, you're adjusting how well it revs, but it'll have a minor effect on the idle. So I always do the idle first without touching the high screw at all. And then I'll adjust the high screw so it revs nicely, and then go back to the idle and readjust that again. And then make sure that we haven't affected it. And you'll basically say, with this being the high and this being the low, you'll get this just where you want it, and then you'll adjust this where you want it. And then you do this back and forth a few times with each screw until you get it balanced out right. So all you new people out there, go ahead and subscribe. It's free. And if you made it this far, you might as well. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.